We are in a series through Daniel, and it's been interrupted some, and it will continue to be interrupted some. But let me catch up. Let me set this up this morning. This narrative occurred about 6 centuries before Jesus' birth. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of the ancient Neo-Babylonian Empire. Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were Jewish teenage exiles from Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar and his armies had invaded Jerusalem. He captured them and some others, and then brought them to Babylon in order to train them, in order to serve him in strategic government positions throughout his empire. God gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream, and it might have been the same reoccurring dream. Nebuchadnezzar, though, had forgotten that dream, couldn't remember it. But God permitted Nebuchadnezzar's forgetfulness so he could prove a point. And that point was so that God could expose the inadequacies and phoniness of Nebuchadnezzar's other wise men and counselors, and ultimately cause it to be apparent that Daniel's God was the only one that had the solution to this problem. So, Daniel presented to Nebuchadnezzar the answers to his dream questions. Daniel presented to Nebuchadnezzar the answers to his dream questions. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had ordered his counselors executed. Since none of them could interpret this dream, these men were now useless to him and therefore disposable. Notice verse 24. This is Daniel 2, verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch. This man Arioch was Nebuchadnezzar's chief executioner. And notice, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He, Daniel, went to Arioch and said thus to him, "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation." Last time, we said that the captain and chief executioner named Arioch had come to see Daniel. He had been searching for Daniel and had found him. And the reason we said that is found in verses 13 and 14. Notice verse 13. So the decree from Nebuchadnezzar went out, and they began killing the wise men. And they sought, notice, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. This word sought meant that there was an attempt to find them. An attempt was made to find Daniel and his companions. Verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, notice, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. So it would seem that Arioch did search for Daniel and his friends, and the intention was to arrest them and have them executed. And then notice verse 25 then reads that Arioch announced to Nebuchadnezzar, "I have found a man," meaning Daniel, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation." So he had been searching for Daniel, we said, and he had found Daniel. So from reading these verses, it would seem that Arioch went to find Daniel. But then notice, the beginning of verse 24 reads that Daniel went to find Arioch. Question: is that some form of a contradiction? No, it's not a contradiction. The Bible contains apparent contradictions. Scripture, though, does not contain actual contradictions. Consider this. Per his assignment from Nebuchadnezzar, Arioch did first find Daniel. And then both of them sat down and discussed the seriousness of this situation. And Daniel then requested to see Nebuchadnezzar. Arioch left Daniel to arrange for that meeting, but he might have been distracted, or there could have been some logistical problems getting to the palace. It seems that something happened to slow this process, and Daniel didn't hear from Antioch as soon as he had anticipated. So at that point, Daniel couldn't wait more. So he went to find Arioch and to demand that he see Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel understood that sometimes we should inspect what we expect. So Daniel went to find Arioch to inspect the situation. Verse 25, then Arioch quickly, notice, quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar was his Babylonian adopted name. Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Verse 27, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot, notice, cannot declare to the king. Daniel said that just to reinforce to Nebuchadnezzar that his so-called esteemed wise men and counselors were unable to complete his assignment. Verse 28, Daniel said, but there is a God in heaven. Stop there. That is such an awesome statement. There is a God in heaven. That is so relevant to all that we experience. But there is a God in heaven. We're facing a seeming impossible situation, but there is a God in heaven. We're between a rock and a hard place and have no clue what to do, but there is a God in heaven. We just don't see how we can continue, but there is a God in heaven. In a crisis, that should be our go-to statement. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. Daniel continued, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. Verse 29, as for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. Verse 30, but as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who made known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Starting at verse 31, Daniel essentially summarizes Gentile rule. Remember, Gentiles are non-Jewish people. We're Gentiles. Daniel essentially summarizes Gentile rule throughout human history. Jesus called this time period the times of the Gentiles. Luke 21, verse 24. We are still in that time of the Gentiles, and we will continue to be in that time of the Gentiles until Jesus returns to the earth. Nebuchadnezzar was about to go to bed one night, and he had been thinking about what would happen to his empire after he died. He fell asleep and had a special dream from God that would answer his question. This dream was an overview of the historical period from Nebuchadnezzar's time to Jesus' return. Once again, this dream was an overview of the entire historical period from Nebuchadnezzar's time to Jesus' return. To Nebuchadnezzar, this dream was almost entirely futuristic. Most of it concerned matters that would happen after his death and centuries after his death. But since we are some 26 centuries removed from Nebuchadnezzar, to us, most of this dream has already happened in the past. And then the final component to this dream is still future. Verse 28. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. That is a reference to our present time. Verse 29, and as for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. One more time, this was almost all futuristic to Nebuchadnezzar, but to us, Most of this is historical, and just some of this is future. So Daniel begins to tell Nebuchadnezzar this forgotten dream. Verse 31, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome." So in this dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees this massive image. We aren't told its exact size, but we do know that it was a great image. It is said to be awesome. Great meaning large. A large image. Verse 32. "This image head was made of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze." Verse 33. "Its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." Verse 34. "You watched in this dream while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces." Verse 35. "Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Verse 36. This is the dream. Daniel has just shared with Nebuchadnezzar the dream he had forgotten. Then he said, "Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king." In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, there was a large metallic image or statue of a man that consisted of 5 sections. The head was made from gold, the chest was made from silver, the belly, meaning midsection, and thighs were made from bronze. The legs were made from iron, and the feet were made from iron mixed with clay. Then a large stone struck the statue and literally destroyed that statue, and then that stone became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. That was the dream Nebuchadnezzar had that he wasn't able to remember. Then starting in verse 37, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar this dream's interpretation. Verse 37, "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you," notice, "for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory." This statement was applicable to Nebuchadnezzar, and in a more limited sense, this is also applicable to us, because we have nothing that God doesn't give us. Amen. All we possess on this earth is on loan to us from God. Verse 38, "And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, God has given them into your hand, and has made you a ruler over them all. You, Nebuchadnezzar, are this head of gold." Verse 39, "But after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." Verse 40, "And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others." Verse 41, "Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay." Verse 42, "And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile." Verse 43, "As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay." Verse 44, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Verse 45, "Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Meaning, people, this is going to happen. This dream is about a succession of kingdoms. Question, what is a kingdom? The word kingdom is mentioned 10 times in this section. A kingdom describes the people and territories under the rule of a single government, and sometimes a singular ruler. This dream's interpretation is that different parts of this statue and the different materials used in creating those different parts represent different historical human kingdoms. The stone represents the ultimate king and his ultimate kingdom, and that last part about the stone we are saving until next time. Notice this statue's head was made from the most expensive material, and then the value of the materials used on the different body parts of the statue from the head down decrease in value. Silver is less valuable than gold. Bronze is less valuable than silver. Iron is less valuable than bronze, and clay is less valuable than iron. Also, there is a corresponding lower specific gravity for each descending element. Specific gravity is a measurement of a substance density. Gold is denser than silver. Silver is denser than bronze. Bronze is denser than iron. Iron is denser than clay. In more precise language, the specific gravities of those materials are gold 19.3, silver 10.5, bronze 8.5, iron 7.6, and clay 1.9. What does that mean? That means that gold at the top, the head consisting of gold, was much heavier, much heavier than the bottom that consisted of iron and clay, meaning that the statue was top heavy. So this statue wasn't a stable and secure image. That means no human government, since these different parts and stages of this image represent human government, no human government is secure and no human government is permanent. Let's go through these stages. First, the statue's head represented the then-present Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire. That empire lasted from 626 BC until 539 BC. Nebuchadnezzar was its most recognizable ruler. Notice the head was constructed from fine gold. That was an appropriate metal, since Nebuchadnezzar used much gold in building Babylon. We mentioned this earlier. Herodias the historian visited Babylon almost a century after Nebuchadnezzar's reign and commented he had never seen so much gold. He described items made from 22 tons of pure gold. Remember, the principal false god in Babylonia was Marduk. Marduk, he was considered the god of gold. Herodias said Marduk was a golden statue seated on a golden throne before a golden table and a golden altar. And the robes of Marduk's priests were interlaced with gold. So gold represented the superior richness and strength of Babylonia. Verse 37, "You, O king," meaning Nebuchadnezzar, "are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom," this Babylonia kingdom, "power, strength, and glory." Verse 38, "And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the fields and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you a ruler over them all. You are this head of gold." Hearing that probably inflated Nebuchadnezzar's ego. He's already arrogant and pompous, and that just further inflated his ego. The head of the statue represented himself, according to Daniel, and his Babylonian empire. His ego, though, was about to be deflated as Daniel continued to interpret this dream. Verse 39, "But after you, Nebuchadnezzar, after you shall rise another kingdom inferior to yours." This is section 2. on this image. This statue's chest and arms represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire. That empire lasted from 539 BC until 332 BC. Cyrus the Great was its most recognizable ruler. We know that this second stage represents the Medes and Persians. How do we know that? Because that is confirmed through secular historical sources and also confirmed in Daniel, Daniel 5, verse 28, and Daniel 8, verse 20. The text reads that this Medo-Persian Empire was inferior to the Babylonian Empire. This word inferior is confusing in this instance because it implies that the Medo-Persian Empire was in a quantitative sense and size less than Babylonia, and it wasn't. The Medo-Persian Empire was a larger empire than was Babylonia and a stronger empire than was Babylonia. The Hebrew word translated inferior means lower. So this is just a reference to where the silver chest and arms were positioned on this statue. Those body parts were positioned lower than the head. Notice the chest and arms were made from silver. It's interesting that silver was used to represent the Medo-Persian Empire. That empire required taxes to be paid in silver. So the empire's coffers were filled with tons and tons of silver. Nevada is the silver state. Medo-Persia was the silver empire. Verse 39 continues. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. The belly, or midsection, and thighs of this statue were made from bronze and represented the ancient Grecian Empire. The ancient Grecian Empire. And that empire lasted from 332 to 63 BC. 332 BC through 63 BC. We know that this third stage represents the Grecian Empire because that is confirmed through reading secular historical sources and is confirmed in Daniel 8, verse 21. Alexander the Great was the most famous Greek general and is considered the greatest general ever from ancient times. His original name was Alexander III of Macedon. He was an actual student of the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle. He sat under Aristotle from age 13 through 16. His father was King Philip II. Philip, though, was assassinated. So Alexander assumed his father's throne at age 20. He immediately ordered all rivals to his throne be caught and executed. He didn't like competition. He had them executed to ensure that no one would be a threat to his position. It was a long campaign of battles lasting a decade before Alexander was able to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire. But he ultimately succeeded. And get this, he founded some 70 cities. And he named more than 20 of them Alexandria after himself. He didn't have an ego problem. In total, his armies marched more than 11,000 miles and created an empire so large it covered 20 million square miles. He conquered and ruled much of the known world at that time. So much so, he commanded people to address him as, quote, Alexander, King of all the earth. It is said that after his conquest, he sat down and wept because he felt there were no more lands to conquer. His invasion techniques were so successful that military academies still, to this moment, teach some of his tactics. It was most unfortunate, but Alexander was a binge drinker. And he fell ill after a banquet and drinking bout. He died 10 days afterward at age 32. We aren't sure the exact cause of death. Might have been alcohol poisoning. We aren't sure. But he reigned just 12 years and 8 months. Listen to this connection to Daniel. Alexander died in Babylon in the actual palace Nebuchadnezzar II had built. That was the same Nebuchadnezzar Daniel served centuries earlier. He was then buried in a gold coffin in Alexandria, Egypt. Under his command, the Grecian armies used bronze in their shields, helmets, and weapons. So it was appropriate that the belly, midsection, and thighs of the statue were made from bronze. Verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom, that fourth kingdom, will break in pieces and crush all the others. Then notice verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Verse 43, and as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Whatever this is describing, it is both cohesive and also conflicted. The legs of this statue were made from iron, and these legs represented the ancient Roman Empire. We know that this fourth stage represented Rome because that is confirmed through secular historical records. The word iron is used to describe Rome 14 times in this text. Historians often use the word iron to describe the ancient Roman Empire. Rome's iron hand, Rome's iron grip, Rome's iron fist, Rome's iron legions, and on and on. Roman armies strengthened their weapons using iron, and the Roman Empire created a war machine that was unmatched. That war machine completely dominated the areas that those three previous empires had ruled. Iron was the strongest metal known at that time, and Rome was the strongest human empire ever conceived. But Rome struggled being a united kingdom, in part because it covered too large a geographical region to govern. Through the means of interpreting this dream, Daniel prophesied that the Roman Empire would ultimately be divided. The two legs on this image represent the division into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Just before his death, Roman Emperor Flavius Theodosius divided the Roman Empire into those two parts in 393 AD. The western part of the Roman Empire started in 27 BC. Caesar Augustus was the first Roman emperor. He was the emperor at the birth of Jesus. That empire was centered and headquartered at Rome and lasted until 476 AD, just over 5 centuries. The eastern portion of the Roman Empire started in 393 AD and was headquartered at Constantinople. Constantinople is now modern Istanbul, Turkey, and lasted until the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople in 1453 AD. In either case, either the case of the Roman section of the Roman Empire or the eastern part of the Roman Empire, no human government has ever lasted as long as Rome. In 2014, the History Channel aired a documentary from a historian named Evan Andrews called 8 Reasons Why Rome Fell. The documentary was then updated in 2019. Because of time constraints, let me mention the 4 reasons from that documentary, the 4 reasons that most relate to us. Reason 1, economic troubles and over-reliance on slave labor. Economic troubles and over-reliance on slave labor. Now, slave labor is unrelated to us at this juncture, and I'm grateful for that. Economic troubles, though, are extremely relatable to us. Rome had serious internal financial problems. Get this, excessive taxation and government overspending. excessive taxation and government overspending, creating an increasing gap between the rich and the poor. And soon, members of the richer classes moved outside Rome in order to avoid taxation. Does that sound familiar? People are moving out of California in record numbers because of taxation. Reason 2, government corruption and political instability. Government corruption and political instability. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries, being a Roman empire, being a Roman emperor, was not what you thought it might be. Being a Roman emperor was almost a death sentence. 20 different men became emperors in a span of 75 years, most often becoming the emperor after the murder of the man they succeeded as emperor. The emperor's personal bodyguards sometimes assassinated emperors at will, his bodyguards, and once even auctioned off the position of emperor to the highest bidder. In addition, the Roman Senate was itself extremely incompetent and corrupt. Because of that, the Roman people had no confidence in government and no confidence in government personalities and politicians. It's so interesting to see how history has repeated itself. Reason 3, Christianity and the loss of traditional Roman values. Christianity is a reason for the fall of Rome and the loss of traditional Roman values. This is most interesting. Some believe the rapid spread of Christianity contributed to the empire's fall because it eroded traditional Roman values. Rome's traditional moral values were immoral values, gratuitous brutality, sexual deviation, and the worst sorts of perversion were common throughout the empire. And Christianity opposed that. The Edict of Milan legalized Christianity in 313 AD. And from that point on, Christians weren't persecuted as before. And Christianity became the state religion in 380 AD. Those decrees ended centuries of Christian persecution, and it created a serious paradigm shift away from Rome's polytheistic pagan culture and emperor worship and moved the focus away from the state. And that was a good thing. It is unfortunate modern Christianity, though, is so anemic, it has almost no impact on our culture. Reason 4, weakening of the Roman legions. Weakening of the Roman legions. Rome's armies were once the most powerful fighting force on earth, but over time that changed. Get this, the Roman government was unable to recruit enough men from the populace, from emerging generations, unable to recruit enough men to serve as soldiers. So certain emperors started hiring mercenaries. Over time, the Roman legions were full of German, Goths, and other barbarians. Those men became fierce soldiers, but had zero allegiance to Rome and would turn on their Roman commanders. A sizable percentage of those barbarians that sacked Rome and brought down the Western Empire had earlier been serving in the Roman armies. So this image is two legs represent that division into the Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. But then notice the fifth and final stage, this statue's feet. His feet were made from a mixture of both iron and ceramic clay. And those feet represented the revived Roman Empire in the last days. Let me stop for a moment. How many of you, this is almost entirely new to you? How many? How many of you know this like the back of your hand? Okay, good. In a chronological sense, each stage represents a forward movement in time. We just cited dates. Notice the forward movement in time. In a chronological sense, each succeeding empire comes in time after the previous empire has expired. But if we search both the distant past and more recent past, we cannot find the slightest historical thing that resembles a 10-nation confederation as representative in the 10 toes on this statue's 2 feet. That means this fifth and final feet and toes stage is still to come. This is still futuristic. So the first 4 stages represented on this image are to us historical and in the past. But the fifth and final stage is still future and prophetical. Now don't miss this. We are seeing that final stage as represented in these feet and toes. We are seeing that final stage being formed now as we speak. Prophetical experts and theologians called that stage the revived Roman Empire. We know that according to Daniel 7, verses 23 and 24, and Revelation 17, verses 12 through 14, we know that a satanic empowered man called the beast or the Antichrist will command a coalition of 10 nations that we now understand to be the revived Roman Empire. Using those nations, this diabolical man will then establish a one world end-time global government. That new world order is scheduled to happen during the tribulation period after Christians are rescued from off this earth at Jesus' beginning return called the rapture. If the rapture is unfamiliar, the rapture describes Jesus descending from heaven, stopping in the atmosphere above the earth, and then in less than a nanosecond, and a nanosecond is a thing, a nanosecond is 1/billionth of a second. In less time than that, Jesus snatches up all Christians from off the earth to join him in the atmosphere, and then together go on into heaven. And then after that rapture happens, the tribulation period begins on earth, where all hell is let loose. That's the pre-tribulation rapture position. That is the position I hold to. I could be mistaken. I've been mistaken before. I believe 1983 I said something I shouldn't have. I don't know. But could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's it. In the middle of that tribulation period, that is horrific, times 1,000, this Antichrist establishes himself as the ultimate global ruler and dictator. We also know that at the end of that tribulation period, at a catastrophic battle called Armageddon, Jesus returns to the earth, and we accompany him. Jesus returns to the earth and defeats Antichrist and his armies at Megiddo, this battlefield in northern Israel. That is illustrated in the stone that crushes Nebuchadnezzar's statue. And more on that next time. There are different opinions about the identification of this fifth empire. This is debatable, as are most things prophetical. But the one suggestion that seems the most sensible to me is this final human empire, the revived Roman Empire. We know there has to be a connection to Rome. Think through this. The image's feet and toes are a mixture of iron and ceramic clay. Remember, the iron represented the ancient Roman Empire. So there's the connection to Rome. Most prophetical experts believe that this revived Roman Empire that is forming now exists now in the form of the European Union. The European Union. In an embryonic form, the European Union started in 1948. But in a formal sense, the European Union was established on November 1, 1993. The EU, European Union, is becoming a geopolitical superpower. Some consider it the United States of Europe. There are 27 nations that are now part of the EU. There were 28 nations until Brexit. Remember in 2016, Brexit, Great Britain left the EU in a formal sense just 12 months ago. This is a map of the present time countries that are part of the European Union. that covers a large geographical region. Some of that covers much of the ancient Roman Empire's geographical region. The EU is structured as an empire, and former European Commission President Manuel Barroso said as much. The EU has the largest existing economic market. The EU has 513 million citizens. The EU consists of nations that together have the largest existing standing army. The EU has its own currency. It's called the euro, and it's the second most traded currency after the US dollar. The EU has its own central bank. Numerous EU countries are on the international front in using cashless payment systems. Cashless payment systems fits into the tribulation period's cashless society and the mark of the beast. The EU has its own flag. The EU has a national anthem. The EU has a common foreign and security policies and is attempting to achieve even greater political unification. The EU has its own border control and coast guard. The EU has its own intelligence commission, and on and on and on. Question: where do the 10 toes from Nebuchadnezzar's image fit into this revived Roman Empire? A normal man has 2 feet, 10 toes. We assume there are 10 toes here. One suggestion is these 10 toes weren't meant to be understood as an exact literal number. That means 10 would be a representative number. The statue is that of a man, and a normal man has 2 feet and 10 toes, so some argue that those toes don't have to match the exact number of nations in the revived Roman Empire. But those 10 toes just represent the revived Roman Empire as a whole, as it exists now in the European Union. Another suggestion, and I believe a better one, is this: that those 10 toes describe an inner group of 10 nations that govern the entire European Union. Those 10 toes describe and represent an inner group of strategic nations, 10 of them, that govern the entire European Union. That's because the European Union was never designed to be governed via a confederation of all 27 or more member nations. Certain member nations have optioned out of some EU legislation, have not wanted to go as fast toward political union as other nations. So the idea is that if the EU goes forward using an inner core of just 10 member nations, it would help move it into a full-fledged political and federal union. I lean toward that interpretation. I believe those 10 toes represent that inner group, that inner core of 10 strategic EU nations. It's a better prophetical fit. The EU's institutional structure, I need to add, is undemocratic. There is too much power concentrated in the center of the EU. It is common knowledge among EU nations that the EU has what has been called a democratic deficit. A democratic deficit. The problem is that an undemocratic arrangement could easily accommodate a dictator such as Antichrist. One critical lesson from this section is that nations come and nations go. Nations rise and nations fall. Each of these human empires represented on this statue have ceased to exist. And this final human global government will also cease to exist the moment Jesus returns to this earth. A common question is, where's the United States in biblical prophecy? The United States is never mentioned or alluded to in those biblical texts that addressed end-time prophecies. Never mentioned, never alluded to. On the surface, it seems improbable that this could happen, and no one wants this to happen. But it's possible that the United States will cease to exist as a nation during this time, or will exist in a diminished and weakened form of a nation and will cease to exist as a global superpower. No one knows for certain. Lord Woodhouseley Alexander Fraser Tytler, born 1774, died 1813, was a Scottish judge, writer, and historian who served as professor of history in Greek and Roman antiquities at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. Since 2000, there has been different emails circulating. Some of us might have received them. Different emails circulating that in part read that this good professor made some statements about the fall of the Athenian Republic that could also be applicable to the United States. Even though I read those statements, I actually found them in a book on Daniel, a quasi-commentary on Daniel from a much, much respected author. If I mention his name, most people in this room would recognize him. That's where I found out about this. But I was suspicious. So I did some investigation to see if that was the case. And it seems that that is an urban legend. Professor Tytler did author some books in the late 1700s and beginning 1800s, but there is no historical record of him ever authoring a book entitled The Fall of the Athenian Republic. Even the supposed fact-finding website called Snopes said his statements were probably apocryphal. Apocryphal meaning of doubtful authenticity. There was no historical evidence that Professor Tytler ever said these words. But someone did. Someone made these statements, and we should consider them carefully. Listen to this. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves excessive gratuities. Meaning, a democracy can only exist until the voters can vote themselves generous, most generous entitlements from the public treasury. Free stuff. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury. Did you hear that? From that moment on, the majority of people always vote for the candidates promising them the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. Thus, the average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 2 centuries. Those nations have progressed through this sequence. Don't miss this. This sequence, from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back again to bondage. Each nation seems to follow this same cycle. And democracies go through that cycle just as fast as other forms of human government. People, this means, according to this cycle, unless God intervenes, our nation, these United States, is on track to absolute extinction. That possible conclusion is upsetting to even consider. It's mind-boggling. How can this be? It could be. But that's not the end. I heard about a 5th grader named Johnny. Johnny was upstairs in his bedroom reading a novel, crime novel. His mother said, Johnny, dinner's ready. Come down. But Johnny was engrossed in his reading and continued to read. It seems the villain, the bad character, was getting the best of the good character. Then his mother, after some minutes, returned to the bottom of the stairs and said, Johnny, your food is getting cold. Come down. It's time to eat. But Johnny just couldn't stop reading because it was getting worse and worse and worse for the good character. His frustrated mother returned in a matter of minutes and said in a louder voice, "Johnny, it's time to eat. This is the last time. Come down here or I'm coming up there." Sensing he was about to get in trouble, Johnny turned to the end of the book and read the last few pages. He finished and tossed the book on his bed. As he started out his room to go downstairs, he said aloud, "Mr. Villain, you think you're in charge right now, but I just read the end of the book and you lose." People, if we consider this still serious pandemic, if we consider the twisted, fraudulent media, if we consider this godless, corrupt, and compromised government we just elected, and add to that the continuing erosion of our personal freedoms and civil liberties, if we consider all that is happening to us right now, then it doesn't seem so good. But guess what? We've read the end of the book. Satan loses and we win. Amen. Let's bow our heads. Father, thank you for your word. Prophecy can be frightening. We don't know what's happening to this nation. What matters most is what's happening to us as individuals. I pray, dear God, if there's someone here, they're not ready for that rapture. If Jesus were to come this afternoon, they would not go up to meet him. They would be left behind. I don't want that for anybody. I pray, dear God, if there's anyone here who's not prepared to see Jesus, I pray that they would come to me after the service and we can set up an appointment and sit down and share with them how they can know that they have Jesus Christ, how they know that heaven is guaranteed to them, and how they can know that no matter what happens on this earth, in the end, we still win. So, Father, I pray that you'll bless this message to our hearts. I know it was a lot of stuff, and different than most messages, but I just pray it'll be beneficial, make a difference in each of us, I pray, and I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Amen.